Hi everybody, I'm trying something new. I thought I would put my face on the video, video lecture as well and see if that helps us engage a little bit. I'm mostly talking to myself. I also want to apologize up front. I'm having some coughing fit right now, and I've been trying to wait to post these until it left, but it hasn't. So I'm just going to push through. I have my water here. So this is week 13. This is a video lecture and guidance. The focus is, mental well-being, and that applies to all of us. So like the last few videos, this is a trauma-informed approach to learning right now, and these same 4 items have been posted, over the last few weeks. Your well-being takes priority, and that is one of the reasons why this lecture is limited in time. So here's our plan. We'll have some announcements and reminders and the takeaway lessons for the reading. Exciting that this is our last reading. Hey! So here's our first announcement. The next Zoom meeting will happen this Thursday. I sent that on Canvas and I may have duplicated it in an email. It's at 2:30 to 3:10. And then you can see the content here on the slides. If you missed this one, don't worry, we'll have another one and we'll talk about the final, and there's more opportunity to discuss all of that later on. Okay. A couple syllabus updates. I was missing an entire week from the syllabus. It was just a date issue, so I fixed that and reposted. And then based on student feedback, it looks like it would be important for us to open the final exam, the project, sooner. So I'll be doing that in week 14. There's no pressure to complete it. It's just a reaction to some students' request. Okay, and then so some reminders coming up. We're going to have quiz 3. The review will be posted next week in the week 14 module, and the live review will happen on the 23rd in a Zoom meeting. The quiz opens that Thursday, and it's not due until May 7th. Reminder that there's a new drop date, April 28th. You do have the option of a pass-fail grade this semester. If no action's taken, the grade that you're earning as a letter grade will transfer into Canvas and into MyMath. I do request that you talk to your advisors before making that decision. There's some financial implications for some of us who take financial aid and things like that, and I don't purport to know all of the ins and outs of that, so I'm humbly requesting that before you make a decision, you talk to your advisor. And if you're a disability studies minor, please talk to Dr. Sarah Rose and or Michaela Salazar. Thank you. This is a reminder, last chance to post your chapter notes. If you haven't done that, it's the 16th, which is this Thursday at 11:59. That said, if you're having trouble getting that done, just email me and tell me a good date and time when that can happen, and it will all be good. So on that note, there were no chapter notes posted for this set of reading for the last set, so that won't be included in here, and I'm just reminding us to check Canvas for your classmates' notes in the discussion board. Okay, so the reading due this week. These 4 chapters were due, and we're going to start with the first one, ethics, which also happens to be our reading theme, ethics. So like last week, there are many important points in the reading, but I'm just going to pull out a few that might help us focus a little bit. So chapter 22 was called Ethics, and one of the takeaways is actually the definition of ethics. So I have my book here, and the definition of ethics that we can work with is literally, I think it's the first sentence here. Yeah, we can work with it. It's sometimes we know what ethics is, but it's a little hard to put it in words. So I'm just using the definition here, and I'm going to read it to you. Ethics is a field of philosophical inquiry that investigates questions of just or right actions and what sort of life is considered good. If you've had a philosophy class, We in philosophy we talk a lot about ethics and what virtue is and next right actions and things like that. So that's going to be the definition that we use. And that is one of the takeaways, is just how to define ethics for ourselves. So we need to know what ethics is in order to apply it to disability studies, which is the next takeaway here. It says, what are some ways ethics is linked to disability studies? And of course, you have your own ideas about it. One of the things that I pulled out was on page 71, and I'll show you, I think I highlighted it. Oops, where's my camera? There we go, I highlighted it. One of the ways that ethics is linked to disability studies has to do with the conversations that we have about disability studies. And I've just included some here. Conversations about institutions, about medicine, who has authority and who is empowered. And these are probably not new for us. We've been talking about them all semester, but in cases like medicine, if we're trying to link that to ethics, it can bring up some questions of what does that have to do with it. So for example, with the medical model of disability, sometimes, pardon me, sometimes there are some ideas about agency and who has the authority to make decisions for other people where medications are concerned, especially if somebody has cognitive disabilities, things like that. One of the takeaways from this chapter is also the idea that discussion of ethics and disability isn't always explicit. It's not kind of in your face. And I really appreciated this takeaway message, that it can just be the sustained demand for equal rights and access, and the sustained critique of oppression that links ethics to disability. And we've been talking about invisibility all semester, pretty much. There is a strong link here between ethics, disability study, and invisibility. So just because we may not see an explicit demand for equal access, we can just in little ways that we advocate for ourselves, or that we correct somebody's use or non-use of person-first language, that can be considered an implicit connection to ethics. Don't like the way that I explained that, so maybe I'll bring that up in the Zoom meeting. The second chapter that we're talking about today it's 35 institutions. And again, sometimes we think about institutions and it seems obvious, but then when we try to put words on it, it's a little harder. So if you turn to the chapter, it's chapter 35, and that is on page 109. There are a couple takeaways here. One of them is that institutions can refer to the physical structure that houses a population. So remember when we saw Owen in the film Life Animated, he was not institutionalized, but he was in an assisted living facility. And so that institution, that actual housing edifice, can be considered an institution. But then there's also the structure of an organization. And we think of structures differently, but especially one that doesn't subscribe to a for, with, and by people with disabilities model, or a nothing about us without us model. We often think of those kinds of things as institutions. That's how I generally think of them, and maybe you do too. The reason why we want to pull apart those two ideas is because we want to look at this institutionalized oppression idea, which is on page 109. I think they say institutionalized ableism, and we know what ableism is. So institutionalized oppression is all around us, and we may not know it, which is one of the things that makes it institutionalized oppression. Excuse me. In general, as I have here, it's discriminatory ideas and assumptions that devalue people and are entrenched in social structures, theories, and concrete practices. So that's a mouthful. So one of the examples is things like the idea that women are, in general, paid something like 80 cents compared to $1 for a man. That is something that is proliferated by old ideas, or I say they're old ideas, traditional ideas that don't apply anymore. That is an example of institutionalized oppression. You can probably think of other ones, and I'd love to hear them at some point if we get to discuss this in our Zoom meeting. Then the third chapter, this is one of my favorite chapters. It's called Madness. It's in chapter 37. And that is on page, it starts on page 174. One of the takeaway concepts here is the very long history of madness, and the idea that the term madness has a long history and that it's changed over time in terms of what it actually means, and it's still changing. There are some strong cultural roots that they mention in the chapter, and then you probably have some ideas yourself. So one of the things I wanted to bring up that I have here is please note that there's some information on autism, the diagnosis of autism and how that has changed. That's on page 118 and 119. It used to be considered, and to some it still is, a form of madness. I think, you know, now we are much more aware than we used to be, but there's still quite a bit of dissemination of misinformation out there. But it's interesting to see how it can be considered a form of madness if we look at it in a specific way historically. So continuing with the idea of history, this video that I posted from Michel Foucault, he's no longer with us, but we can't really talk about disability studies without mentioning him. I posted this video last week in relation to the chapter on sexuality and alluded to the fact that it's going to help us for madness. So here we are. If you haven't watched it, please do. It's very informative and really fun to watch. It's not very long, but it does offer a bit of a history of madness and some really interesting ideas about how people who were considered mad were viewed in history and where the real problems might lie. So that's a preview about that video, and I do encourage you to watch it. Continuing with madness, this is a prompt to read the handout on Canvas. It's called Psychotic Thought, and the question that I'm posing to you is, what does madness look like to you? So a lot of times artists, I'm an artist, get a quote bad rap because we're considered mad, or we're the crazy artist, or that kind of thing. I have my very strong opinions of that, which I will put aside. But one of the ideas that's comorbid between creativity and madness is this idea of the unexpected. And that is what this Psychotic Thought handout alludes to. It's from a book called Impro, which is improvisation, but it's the Brits word, impro. And the author, Keith Johnstone, brings up some interesting ideas about psychotic thought and his feelings on it. So I encourage you to read that. It's very short. It's less than a page, something like that. Then the last chapter that we have, fittingly, is called Performance. And I like how it's circled back, almost as if I planned it. The takeaway from this chapter, sorry, what page are we on, is, so this chapter is 137, it starts on 137. The chapter is number 45, Performance. One of the takeaways from this is how many different ways we think of performance, some metaphorically and some concrete. And the author of this chapter has given us 3 ideas: an involuntary way to think about it, semi-conscious, and conscious. And I'm going to explain those now. So in terms of performance, an involuntary, so I'll just give you the preview to what this author says. It says, these 3 episodes are all disability performances. So involuntary, semi-conscious, and conscious, the author says, are disability performances. Involuntary means a way that someone perceives me as a person with a disability. That's an involuntary thing. I have nothing to say about that. That's unless I confront them. That's all somebody else's idea. Then the semi-conscious is when I'm reminded somehow during the day of my disability. And then conscious is our purposeful choices as a person with a disability. And I'm going to move to the next video.